Hi, my name is Luis Vargas. I'm a Principal Program Manager on the SQL Server team, and today we'll be talking about how Azure Virtual Machines is the best platform for SQL Server 2016. Azure Virtual Machines basically are virtual machines hosted in the Microsoft public cloud. You can choose to use one of our Microsoft images that we have available in the gallery, or you can bring your own images. We have images for the different versions of SQL Server, from SQL Server 2016 all the way to 2008 or 2. We have different editions of SQL Server available as well, from Express, Web, Standard, and Enterprise. So you can choose the one that adapts to your needs. We always have the latest hot fixes for security for SQL Server and Windows. So something less to worry about. All of these virtual machines can be created in 10 minutes or less. So very soon, you can have a virtual machine running with SQL Server. Once the machine is running, you can connect to it using Remote Desktop, PowerShell, ADO.NET, OLEDB, ODBC, JDBC, or whatever driver you prefer to use. You only pay for these virtual machines when they are running. If you want to stop for some time, you can pause the machine and resume it after that. And the cost of the virtual machine depends on the size and the version of SQL Server that you're running. One very interesting thing for our customers with software assurance is that you can use your existing SQL licenses in Azure as well. And finally, you have elasticity of these virtual machines. So you can start with a very small virtual machine, for example, 1 core and 2 gigabytes of memory, and you can increase that all the way to 32 cores and 512 gigabytes of memory. Azure is an extremely secure environment. We have many different layers of security available. So we have physical security, for example, where all the data centers are monitored continuously and only very restricted personnel have access to the data center. We have infrastructure security, where we protect the network itself so that only virtual machines inside of your private network can be accessed by you. We protect Azure storage as well. So the storage of these virtual machines is authenticated using strong keys, and that means that only you and your virtual machines can access their storage. We have a very large number of certifications available for security, everything from ISO to SOC to HIPAA, for example, in the healthcare industry. So all of this is available in the Azure site. We have a strong SQL Server security, so all the security features that you are familiar with, like authentication, for example, with Windows in Active Directory or SQL Server, as well as the encryption of databases and backups, is available. And in SQL 2016, you can use Always Secure, for example, to encrypt all the communication between the client and server. We have very easy and secure connectivity as well, so you can choose how you want to connect to these virtual machines. You can connect over public endpoints, over the internet, which is super easy. And you can even restrict the specific IPs or subnets that can connect to these endpoints. Or if you want a more secure approach, you can always create a VPN side-to-side tunnel between your on-premises environment and the Azure data center. And this will guarantee that all the communication between the two is encrypted. You can set up the tunnel using a VPN device. So you can use a VPN device of your preference, like Citrix, Cisco, WatchGuard, etc. Or you can set it up using Windows Server routing and remote access services. We have reliable storage, super important for SQL Server. We have 3 synchronous local copies of every disk attached to the virtual machine, and this ensures that you don't have any data loss. So we have a reliable automated verification system that is continuously looking at these disks, and if we detect that one of these copies has been corrupted, for example, because the disk has been gone wrong, we automatically detect that and start a new copy of the disk. And all of this is transparent by the VM, so this guarantees that your data is always safe and secure. Additionally, we have 3 more asynchronous copies in a remote data center, and this is to guarantee that in the worst case scenario, if the whole Azure data center run into a disaster, we have 3 additional copies to recover in a remote site. The storage is fast, something that is super important for SQL Server. We support solid-state drives in the backend for the storage. And additionally, the virtual machine itself has a local SSD drive that can be used as a read cache. And this guarantees that all the data that is read can be populated into the cache, and after that read directly from the local machine. So this guarantees low latency. If the data is read from the backend, it's around 4 milliseconds in average. If it's read from the cache, it's less than 1 millisecond. So very, very, very fast reads. We have different sizes of disks that you can use, all the way from 128 gigabytes to 1 terabyte. And depending on the size of the disks, you get different number of IOPS. So you get all the way to 5,000 IOPS, and the amount of storage bandwidth. So you get all the way to 200 megabytes per second. Finally, all the reads coming from the cache are a gift. So if you have reads that are coming straight from the local cache, all of those come extra for free on top of the storage bandwidth associated to the disk. We have powerful VMs. So we have many different types of virtual machines that you can use depending on your needs. You can start with a small machine, for example, like DS1, which has a single core and 3.5 gigabytes of memory, all the way to a machine like GS5 that has 32 cores, 448 gigabytes of memory. We actually have the largest VM size in the market. So GS5, largest VM size, is great, for example, for SQL Server 2016 in-memory workloads, right? And again, this is only available in Azure. We provide high availability as well. So we have an SLA for these virtual machines, which is 99.95%, which means less than 22 minutes of downtime per month. And this includes both any planned downtime that Azure does to protect the host operating system, as well as any unplanned downtime due to physical failures. So, for example, failures on the physical host or in the network. So all of that is covered by the SLA. For security and privacy reasons, we don't see inside of your virtual machine. So in case that your virtual machine, for example, runs into memory exhaustion or SQL Server doesn't have enough memory available, we won't detect that. However, you can always detect those failures and guarantee high availability for SQL Server inside of that virtual machine by configuring a high availability technology in SQL, like SQL Server Always On, for example. By doing this, you can detect those failures and automatically fail over one SQL Server in a virtual machine to a different SQL Server instance in another machine in less than 10 seconds. By doing this, you can achieve more than 99.99% availability, which is less than 4 minutes of downtime. So just as an example, here in the slide, you can see we have two virtual machines where one has a primary replica of SQL Server, another one has a secondary replica. In case that for some reason the primary replica becomes unavailable, the secondary becomes the primary in a failover that takes less than 10 seconds. And when the previous primary comes back online, it will automatically become the secondary for the new primary. And that's how you can guarantee high availability for SQL Server in the system. We offer the easiest configuration of any cloud provider. We don't just give you a virtual machine, we actually help you configure your SQL Server inside of that virtual machine. We help you configure things like the SQL Server connectivity, performance best practices, patching for SQL Server and Windows, backups, database encryption, and SQL Server Always On. So all of these things we help you with so that you don't have to think on those and you can focus more on your application. We actually provide easy monitoring. So we allow you to monitor all the SQL Server performance counters in the Azure portal. You can additionally use different tools like the Operations Insight portal, for example, which allows you to monitor the best practices across all your SQL servers and give you recommendations to ensure high availability, high performance, high security, etc. Finally, for all our customers using System Center, you can still use System Center and you can monitor all of your SQL Server virtual machines using your System Center deployments. At this point, we're going to look at the demo and how to create and configure a SQL Server 2016 virtual machine in Azure. This is the Azure portal. Here you can see the different versions of SQL Server that we have available in the Azure Gallery, starting with SQL Server 2008 or 2, to 2012, 2014, and 2016. We have different editions available ranging from Express to Web to Standard to Enterprise. In this case, we're going to create a SQL Server 2016 virtual machine. So all I have to do is say create. And at this point, I have all the different configurations available for my virtual machine. First, we will specify the name of the virtual machine. So I will say my SQL virtual machine. Next, the name of the administrator and the password. Now we'll specify the resource group, which is a container for multiple virtual machines. We'll say my resource group. And finally, the location. So we have many different locations available around the world. Now we can select the size of the virtual machine. So I already have some recommended ones, or I can view all the different sizes that I have available in the system. Right? In this case, I'm going to select a DS13 virtual machine, which comes with 8 cores, 56 gigabytes of RAM, 16 terabytes available, and 25,600 IOPS. Now I can select different sizes for the virtual machine. So I can select, for example, the type of storage. I will use premium storage, which is all based on SSDs. And I will enable monitoring, and this will ensure that I have all the monitoring for SQL Server and Windows available in the virtual machine. Now I will select the arguments for SQL Server. First, I can select the connectivity for SQL Server, so I can choose if I want to allow connectivity only inside of the virtual machine, or within a virtual network, or over the internet. So in this case, for simplicity, we're going to select public over the internet. Going to specify the port where we want SQL Server to listen for connections. Next, we can enable SQL authentication, and this will make my Windows administrator a login into SQL Server that I can use to connect from a different domain if I want to. Next, we will select the configuration of the storage for the SQL Server virtual machine. Here, I can specify the number of IOPS or the amount of throughput that I need from storage. Depending on the size of the virtual machine, I can have different numbers. So for example, I select 25,000 IOPS, 256 megabytes per second, and then I'll specify 6 terabytes that I need. Next, I can specify the optimization of the storage. So depending on the workload that I will run, I can optimize SQL Server, the storage, and Windows to that specific workload. So we can configure, for example, for transactional processing, if we want transactions to commit as soon as possible. Or we can optimize it for data warehousing if we want to read as much data as we can from the storage. In this case, we're selecting transactional processing. Next, I can specify when to patch SQL Server and Windows inside of the virtual machine. So I can specify the day when I want to patch, or I can select the maintenance hour when I want to start patching the machine, in this case 2 in the morning on a Sunday. And finally, the maintenance window, and this is how much time I want to allow for patching. And this guarantees that all the patching happens within that time frame. Next, I can specify whether to automate backups for SQL Server. So if I enable backups, SQL Server will automatically take backups depending on the workload that is executing. If it's a very heavy workload, it will take backups faster. Can specify the retention period, and that means for how long I want to keep my backups available, so that in case that I want to return to some point in time, my backups are available in the system. Finally, I can encrypt my backups, and by specifying a password, SQL Server will create an encryption key that will be used to encrypt these backups, so that only SQL Server can access and decrypt those backups. When I click OK, I will see all the different settings that I specify. And after that, my virtual machine will be provisioned. It takes around 10 minutes to provision the virtual machine. Once the machine is provisioned, it will look like this. So we have a virtual machine with SQL Server that is already running. I can see the size of the virtual machine. In this case, it is a DS12 machine with 4 cores and 28 gigabytes of memory. I can see the public IP address to connect to that virtual machine, and some monitoring information, for example, CPU usage and memory usage, information about disk reads and writes, and even some performance information related to SQL Server. For example, SQL user connections today. I can edit this chart and add more monitoring performance counters for SQL Server. This will allow me to monitor SQL Server in an easy way. You can see we have monitoring counters for .NET, the virtual machine itself, like CPU, disk reads and writes, memory, etc. And we also have multiple SQL Server performance counters. So I can specify, for example, transaction rate, number of user connections, etc., etc. After this, I can simply go into Management Studio, for example, and I can connect to my virtual machine. All I have to do is specify the IP address of the virtual machine. I can say connect, database engine, and the IP address. Once I do that, I can connect to my SQL Server. From here, everything is exactly the same as the SQL Server that you know and love. So we can connect to a database, for example, and we can see the different tables available. We can execute queries, etc., etc. In this demo, you have seen how easy and fast it is to create and configure a SQL Server virtual machine in Azure. We have tens of thousands of customers already deploying production workloads on SQL Server and virtual machines. Many of these are mission critical, so the customers depend on these applications. You can read a lot of these case studies by going into Microsoft Case Studies. Finally, we have many resources available. You can go and learn more in the documentation. Also, feel free to ask any questions. Any questions that you have regarding SQL Server or virtual machines, go into the forum, and we check that forum every day. We answer all of these questions. We want to hear from you what do you like and what can be improved. And finally, go and try SQL Server today. We have our gallery image available, so go and do. It's very easy, and we want to hear from you. Thank you.